hopefully, my technical issues will subside here. We have Reginald and we have Warren for the remainder of this hour at least, and if they're more than welcome to hang out till 10 o'clock East Coast time if they want to. I wanted to start the program off by talking about this event that occurred in Libya today, and I know that, or yesterday, last night rather, and I know that we started off on the topic of employment, so maybe I'll hang on to getting into the Libya thing until it brings itself into the conversation. But, the back to the employment thing, I ended via cell phone the first segment with talking about it as being an employer's market, and I'm telling you what, during the break, Reginald said he's, still doing his security, at least it's a job, and he's 100% right. It is, without a doubt, a completely employer's market out there. For every person or for every job that comes up, there's, we're seeing scores and scores of applications. The days of being able to name your own price and being able to go out and find a job, without relocating at least, seem to be completely gone. And what's amazing to me is this is a peripheral topic, it seems, in this political, as Warren likes to say, kabuki theater. They're kind of dancing around it, dancing about, we're in the midst of some sort of recovery. But the truth is, Warren, a lot of non-persons out there, correct?
Correct. And, I'm watching, a girl that is just in the middle of college, an honor student, having to fight for a job locally in a place that produces, yogurt. Okay. And,
I'm sorry.
And she can't get paid. And this is a major company and they don't care. So not to say that there's any benefits that would be connected to this job. So right off the bat, you have people that are not like her, that are relying on this job for a living. They have got to take a bus to go to work, and there's no health benefits. And then maybe the manager gets health benefits, and they find out that every insurance company now is only going to pay 140% of Medicare and Medicaid. And in our neck of the woods, a doctor would laugh at Medicaid, and at 140%, they would be sort of laughing harder. So essentially, this idea that you can make a living in this economy is going by the wayside. If you have a job, you're holding on to it and probably not worrying about it too much. But look what's happening in Chicago with the teachers. Yeah. And what we see playing out in the media is divide and conquer. So the knee-jerk reaction is to say, look what the teachers have, and they're going to get 16% raise over 4 years, and look how much they're earning, $75,000 a year on average. And I don't have that potential in my economy for the same thing. Yet I have to pay for health care, which I can afford because it's a fraudulent game. I've got to go and pay for increasing numbers of taxes, small taxes, piranha taxes. And I've got to go out and vote for either Romney or Obama. And I don't know why I would vote for two ugly candidates for prom queen, because that's what it boils down to. But this is either going to hit you personally or it's not. And now the culture says that if I'm not personally affected, most people don't consider that it's happening. It's in the unseen world. But to the people that have to get 2 or 3, 4 of these part-time jobs in companies that were exempted from the same regulations, healthcare, that smaller employers have to adhere to, we're going into a third world economy with this difference. In the third world, people make money doing all sorts of things for other people. I mean, you'll sit in a third world cafe and people will bring you tea, and the person that is the tea boy has enough money to live within his own context. So here we have this context where transportation is very expensive, where taxation is very expensive, and where the cost of living is very expensive, yet the earning capacity is declining because of government policy, because of non-core inflation, because we're paying for fraud in the medical industry, because we're paying for the great fraud of empire, and it's not sustainable. And
where Reginald's at, Reginald, I mean, what are you seeing? I mean, I keep waiting for this great revolt to occur because it's glanced over. I mean, all this stuff is glanced, the real new information is glanced over, except for maybe alternative media. There's real swaths of this country that truly have entered into almost like a third world status. Reginald?
Incredibly shrinking workforce. That's what we're seeing, you know. Yeah. If they can't find a job, they're not unemployed, they're no longer part of the economy, you know. We're seeing every month at least 300,000 people leave the workforce. You know, right here in Michigan, it's incredible what employers can get away with when people are desperate for jobs. You know, their attitudes definitely change, confidence changes, they're able to just do whatever they want and say whatever they want. They can simply say, well, we're the boss, and, you know, you basically get shafted. I mean, that's what happens to people. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. You're at a weaker position when the economy gets this bad, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about until, again, like Warren said, until it actually affects them. Now, and as far as this election, I got to say that, you know, I'm tired of people saying, oh, well, if you don't vote, you can't complain, which makes no sense to me. You know, I wasn't a part, you know, just because I'm not playing a part in a corrupt, fraudulent system, that doesn't mean that I don't have a right to complain about it. You know, it's like me saying, well, you know, if you weren't a part of the Madoff scheme, you don't have a right to complain about it. You know, I just don't get it.
We'll get into that on the backside of this second break. You know, and I'll put that question to both of you. You know, do we have a right to complain about it? You know, Warren Pollock's vote of no website is dead on. These guys aren't choices. We're going to talk about this on the backside of this break, guys. We'll be back in 3.5 minutes. Hang tight. Pollock and DEMCAD from YouTube and both great friends of the program, and I'm excited to have you guys both on here at the same time. It's been a while since I've talked to either of you. We were talking about, Reginald was talking about you know, the choices we have, and I mentioned Warren Pollock's Vote or No website. And Reginald had spoke to the fact that, you know, he's tired of people saying if you didn't vote you shouldn't complain, that type of thing. And, you know, I do want to just touch on that a little bit. I mean, we see this carnival, the circus going on right now. We see this, you know, the Democrats just finish up and Obama gets a slight bump. But, you know, as far as I'm concerned, at this point, I don't care. I'm going to have Doug Weed from the Ron Paul campaign. He's going to be on Monday night, and we'll talk a little bit about this. And I want to get his take as close to an insider as I've spoken to on this campaign madness. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter at this point. It's game over for as far as if anything is going to change. It isn't going to. It doesn't matter. We have Obama. We have Romney. I see absolutely no difference between the two of them or either one of them changing course in this country. We're still going to be kowtowing to the banks until we have the ultimate collapse. Reginald, I'll kick that back to you since you were speaking when we went to break.
Well, yeah, until it actually affects enough people at the same time in an extreme way where they can't actually ignore it, they're going to just put up with it. And it's going to take something extreme, something involving food, something involving their very basic survival. Until then, people are just going to tolerate it. And they'll fall for every little trick, you know, just like how the media hypes up every little event for its own benefit or for the benefit of the powers that be, you know. This whole Libya situation that they're hyping up right now.
Right.
You know, the ambassador killed, he's a hero and all this other stuff. I mean, there's got to be some type of angle they're playing for.
Well, I think there is. But Warren, let me ask you that question. Do you know, you and I haven't spoke on air for a little bit. I think I know the answer you're going to give to this question, but as far as the political landscape, it's set in stone. I mean, we're going to, you know, get one of these guys and nothing's going to change.
I think so. And I don't think that the American people are going to do anything about it. I don't know if you want me to reread my Ann Barnhart quote.
Yeah, do it.
Via the email. Yeah, we've been just trading emails today, and she says the following. I basically am saying to her that I envision a time where a lot of our interdependencies in our economy would fail. We'd sort of see a cascade of some kind. And I say that no leader is going to be able to address this problem, and most people in our culture won't want to address this problem either. They won't do anything meaningful to try to block this trend. So she says that she agrees, and to quote her, there will be zero resistance there's a lot of noise in there. She agrees there will be zero resistance as total self-centeredness plus decadent materialism yields complete cowardice and passivity. I don't think there is anything that the government could do at this point to cause the people to resist. 401k confiscation, bank account confiscations, mass executions. Anything and everything will be tolerated, justified, or just passively ignored. So those are the words of Ann Barnhart, just via email correspondence we had today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, if we look at what the focus has been on, and Warren, I'm going to see if you've noticed this as well. For the last, I'm going to say solid for the last month, we've been hearing about the necessity to avert this fiscal cliff. And of course, they've been talking about this since they made the deal to raise the debt ceiling to sink us into $16 trillion in sovereign debt. But as we get closer to January, and namely as we get closer to the election, they've really turned this into the hot button topic to the point, that we have Christine Lagarde coming out last week talking about it. And, the Citibank came out earlier this week with a statement saying it's the biggest challenge, the headwind we face is this fiscal cliff. And they all come at it at the same perspective, which is we need to, we need to have a comprehensive budget plan to reduce our debt and get our spending under control. It sounds good, but when Lagarde talks, no problem, Reg.
Sorry,
he's called to duty.
Go ahead.
When we read into these stories or listen to these statements, they're talking about getting our fiscal house in order. Get the spending under control and reduce our debt. But at the end of all these statements, they have the same conclusion, which is we need to raise our debt ceiling some more so we can keep going further and further into debt. And in this governed by crisis, this that we've seen over the last 5 years has trained the majority of the people in this country that this is all a good thing. So I agree with you. I agree with Ann Barnhart that what could possibly happen, other than, as Reginald spoke, when the checks aren't showing up or when people are starving, what could possibly change the American people's mind to say enough is enough?
Well, this is sort of my perception, Charlie, because I'm looking at the news, like the tempo of the news, which I'm generally trying to ignore. Right. But it seems like there is almost a very little in terms of news that is trickling into even the alternative community. So what I mean by this is that there really are no news items that are floating around. We're not seeing a story every minute. We're not seeing a headline every minute. We're seeing just this slow tempo of information, which is mostly misinformation, on the ticker. Right. In the way there's no volume on the stock market, there's really no volume in the news business anymore. And it's almost as if this doesn't mean that things are not happening. I mean, just the opposite. The fact that there is silence in the media is an indicator that a lot of things are sort of spinning out of control in the background. And the less that you hear, probably the more devastating are the events. And if you want to take an example of that, you could even look at the Drudge Report and do a count of the stories which they have, and they don't even fill up a large part of your screen. There may be, where there was a whole page of news articles from this news aggregator that is biased as everyone else is. You'll see just a very few stories from a very few sources. Right. And this doesn't mean that things are stopping. It just means that our awareness of them is stopping. And if there was not awareness before, there won't be awareness of what's going on now, and that's quite telling. I just want to mention, an interview which I did with John McManus, if I could. Yeah. He's the president of the John Birch Society, and he was saying to me online that he thinks very highly of Joe McCarthy, and he was kind enough to speak to me, even though I vehemently disagree with some of the platforms. In our talk, we actually did disagree in a few places. But the reason I had him on is because I want people to be aware where most of the alternate news that they're receiving is coming from. And it is that organization, and we talked about the relationship of that organization to I think Fred Koch or Koch, and he's the father of the Koch brothers.
Right.
So when you're looking at, we had talked about Agenda 21. In that moment, Alex Jones was talking about Agenda 21 as well. And when you look at a lot of the information which is funneling into the alternate news realm, which is from von Mises and from Austrian economics, the Ron Paul movement, much of it is using that organization as a think tank. And I don't know who Reuters uses as a think tank, but they're certainly a propaganda arm of another variety.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we can get into more of that after this break. And you're right. I mean, when we're whittled down to just these handful of news organizations putting out the news, who's writing it? Where are they getting their, what center are they getting their information from? We're going to be back with Warren, Pollock, and DEMCAD in 3 minutes. We're along with Reginald, also known as DEMCAD from YouTube, and Warren Edward Pollock of WEPollock.com and WE Pollock on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to either of these guys, do it, because they put out all kinds of great information. Reggie was asking during the break, is anybody even watching the news anymore, watching the mainstream? And continue with that thought, Reggie.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just a question. Is anybody watching? Because the Republican convention ratings were down significantly. The Democratic ratings were down. Ratings for the Democratic convention were down. You see less registration and voting for blacks and Hispanics. You may see that for whites as well. Are people really even engaged in this stuff? I mean, do young people even buy this stuff anymore? I mean, are people just completely giving up and saying that, well, you know what, America's going into decline and there's nothing we can do about it? All I can do is just hold on to the little crumbs that I have.
I don't know. What do you think of that?
Have people given up? I think people are giving up. I think you're seeing it in the amount of people leaving the workforce. I think you're seeing it every day. For a lot of people, there's really no incentive to work. A lot of people want to work, but when you're being offered minimum wage, $8, $9 an hour, but you got to pay $4 for gas. Well, that's how you get to work. You're making and paying taxes. You're making like $4 an hour.
Warren, is it breaking? Warren, is it breaking the spirit of the country over an extended period of time to where you're just giving up and going along to get along and trusting whatever somebody in a suit tells you? I mean, is that where we're at?
Well, I think that's what it is. I think there's a lot of context. In other words, you grow up like I did, with two cars in the garage. One person worked, was able to go off to a good job and to earn enough money. And, my dad was involved in engineering. If you drive a car, you use what he designed. If you use a CD on your computer, he designed part of that process. So that doesn't exist here anymore. What does exist is the context. So if you go outside your house and you look around, you see the corporate context. You see Red Mango, which doesn't pay its workers for 2 days of labor. That's where we started. You see McDonald's. You see Nike. You see all of this corporate context. When you turn on your TV, you see the corporate context. When you go to about an election, you see two brands of the same party. And then you see celebrity, and this is what you believe in. So you have this embedded feeling that you had based on your experience for many years where everything was okay. And then you have this overwhelming din of the corporate context. So you wake up a little bit, and now your source of information is the John Birch Society, but that corporate context is still there, and it's pervasive. And you don't think too deep and too hard. How am I getting my oil? What is happening to the laborer in Foxconn in China? And it slowly hits you. And then even when it hits you like a brick personally, you still may be in that state of denial. So if we project where we are now, that it's a sort of a surreal time where you don't really have a grounding that's outside of this context, as this crisis progresses, it will become more of a surreal time where things just blatantly don't make any sense. I mean, I try to get over the bridge.
Well, I think we're there now.
We're there now. Yeah, I tried to get over the bridge. It was $14 toll. Well, what's minimum wage? $7.25. Right. So you have to work 2 hours to get over a toll. You go through a red light camera, it's $100. You get pulled over, it's $500. The economy, you know, and but it just gets surreal and it gets very personal. And this is what I was trying to say to you last time. All the looting today has been from the top down. Okay? It's been from the top down. But as this real time degrades, you're going to see some people at lower strata of the economy have looting opportunities as well. Now, you might think, I don't know if you remember the riots that were out in California. I don't know if it was Rodney King. I forget the individual that was involved, but the looting was where people just took the store and they just broke the window and took the TV.
Sure.
But we had sort of this looting through the mortgage crisis where an individual guy put up a placard and now he's originating mortgages and selling them off to Bank of America, who sells them off to you, the taxpayer, through Fannie Mae. So there was a period of looting that was accessible to the middle class and that was stimulative. There's going to be another phase of looting that I think that we're going to go into through this sort of surreal time, and people that are adept at exploiting the system could benefit from this, but it will be a temporary benefit. And an idea behind that, an example, might be not being able to pay your credit card. I know Ann Barnhart's not paying your taxes. I wouldn't recommend that because I don't think that the timing is right. You know, you and I know people that did strategic defaults in their mortgage and they got away with it because the timing was right. And this sort of looting is always has to be timed, properly. But the problem is, as times get more surreal, they will get more surreal as the context that starts to break. As the things that you're accustomed to in your daily life don't work very well. And individually, if you go into a hospital and walk out with a $300,000 bill for a snake bite, you understand that this time is upon you. It's a surreal time, and there's no empathy.
I'm sorry to catch up. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's no empathy because the culture is one where we are individually isolated, and that's part of sort of this divide and conquer.
But don't you think that you're in New York, and I would say that you're still in the epicenter of where the unbelievable amounts of cash has been flooded into. That surreal state exists in many parts of the country, like where Reginald's at, like where my sister's at in Alabama. I mean, it's pretty dang surreal in your neck of the woods, isn't it, Reginald? I mean, Reginald's a perfect testament to this. He gets his degree in counseling, wants to work with kids or in school, and he's tied up in the security industrial complex now. Go ahead, Reggie.
I earned my degree in criminal justice.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to become a probation officer, but I had an opportunity to work with young people, and that was a pretty good opportunity, and I'm getting to the point where I would rather just do something that matters. That's more important to me even than the money, because, when you're doing something that doesn't matter, you feel like it doesn't matter, it's demoralizing. If you do something that doesn't matter, if you do something that makes you feel like it doesn't matter for too long, you feel like you don't matter.
Reg, you were working with AmeriCorps, was that right, in
Yes.
Ketchikan, Washington? So that's an example of where things might go to. Alaska. Ketchikan, Alaska. That was an example of where things might go to, where there are no jobs. There's been low-level looting in the low-level, distressed areas of our economy. You see some looting there. Bad neighborhood loots a good neighborhood, that kind of thing. And the hand is reached out from the central authority and says, okay, join AmeriCorps. And I'm sure they didn't pay you very much at AmeriCorps, right?
Well, no, it was volunteering, and it was pretty rough to get by, but I found a way.
Right, but they probably put you on the food stamps. They probably put you on the payroll of, okay, here, have this little stipend or whatever. and that's what you do when you have a cohesive society and you have revolt in your society, is you draft everybody. And that's what happens. If your society is able to stick together, you might be drafted into volunteering. And I know that already happens in the perverted honors program of high school students here in the bastion of evil, New York. As the kids volunteer for all sorts of ridiculous things as public service, and they've been indoctrinated and trained to be nice little pliant robots. And then they go to a college, and my family is not exempt from this. They go to college where they learn linguistics so that they can speak to deaf people who aren't going to listen to them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the
you don't know what to say. You don't know what to say to that.
Well,
but, it's part of.
There's so many useless degrees out there.
Yeah, it's part of the, it's part of the contextual programming, and when you in the olden, I've worked in a factory. Charlie was in the Army. Reggie is a security guard. At some point, these kids have an expectation to go to high school, to go to college, and then to go into a profession. And the economy just doesn't support it. It can't support it. There's nothing in the economy except usury. That's it. That's all that's there. There are some areas of high points in technology. A lot of it was nuclear, if you believe it or not. That was a major export before they changed the statistics. Now, finance is a big part of the economy. Fraud is a large part of the economy. Healthcare is a large part of the economy, and that's just another financial scam. And then service is another part of the economy. And we saw, I think we sort of have to agree that, we made a good call on the peak oil issues ahead of time. Nobody believed us. But they could buy time, but sooner or later, you can't have an economy which is based on lies continue. And
right, but I think that's the point. And maybe I see it a little simpler. I think that's the point. We've seen, just going back to 2007-8 to now, it hasn't been a matter of trying to fix anything. It's been a matter of we're going to paper over and pretend. But as everything you just said, that there is no segment of the economy that is going to support, the $1 trillion worth of education debt that's out there. There's no segment of the economy that's growing into jobs that are that'll support any kind of standard of living whatsoever. We see this expansion of military security industrial complex. And what else do you have from there? If it isn't being papered over and you're not having a gun in your hand, what else are you doing? The truth is, there's nothing. Everything else is pretend. Everything else is pretend. Like selling a Chevy Bolt is pretend. We lose $40,000 on every one of them we sell. The housing market, houses being sold all around now, it's all pretend on a fantasy that we bottomed out. Guys, I'll talk to you both after the break to see if you want to hang out. This wraps up the first hour. We're going to be back in about 8 minutes after the long break. Maybe with Reginald, maybe with Warren, maybe with both. Certainly with me. I'll be back in about 8.5 minutes. Hang tight. Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. We continue with Reginald, also known as DEMCAD from YouTube, and Warren Edward Pollock from WEPollock.com, as well as WE Pollock on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to these guys, get out there and subscribe to them. Like I said, they deliver all kinds of good information every day. And we were, if you're not in the chat room, I'm going to monitor for the rest of the program. If you have questions for either one of these guys, get in there, post your question. Thanks to everybody who's continuing to show up in there and participate in the program. And we were talking during the break, and Warren literally, 30 seconds ago asked me, what do I think's going on? And I want to give my take of where we're at in Warren Pollock's breakdown dirt nap crisis, and then I want to get your guys' take on it, where I'm wrong, where I'm right, where we disagree. But I was just starting to say when the music started playing, it shocked me this morning when I woke up and saw the somewhat coverage. Look, I went to the gym at lunch today, and I spent an hour on a treadmill watching the news, and I'm trying to get informed, trying to get some information on what happened inside of Libya. Figuring this was going to dominate. This is going to dominate the news today. And what dominated the news was Romney's response to it and Obama's response to it. Not the fact that it happened, the fact that Mitt came out a little too soon to address it, and then had to basically run and cover. But it's all garbage. It doesn't. I mean, no one's covering the idea that in 2010 we had an Italian reporter interview. Let's see, Allah Hassadi, who was a commander for the so-called freedom-fighting rebels in Libya, who was shooting at Americans in Afghanistan a year before, who blatantly admitted to the reporter that he's got 25 guys serving underneath him that were shooting at Americans in Iraq. You know, this was the Al-Qaeda that we were supposed to be all afraid of. So we support these guys in Libya, and it turns around and, of course, turns into a situation where they're anti-American, because they were anti-American when they were in Libya trying to take over that nation. So we get this ambassador and 3 Americans killed, and we want to, you know, the first story I saw about it out of D.C. was from a senator saying that this has the handwriting of Al-Qaeda all over it. This is from Senator Bill Nelson from the defense. He sits on one of the defense committees, and he's talking, this has the handwriting of Al-Qaeda all over. Well, of course it does. It is Al-Qaeda. It's the same Al-Qaeda we created, this boogeyman we created to go to war, that we turned around and funded. John McCain came on board and said these guys are hero patriots, put his arms around them and said they should be, brought into the global community. Well, when this snake turns around and bites you, you know, why should we be surprised by this at all? And how the media can cover this and present a story where Nelson's talking about how it looks like Al-Qaeda. Where's the reporter that says, yeah, of course it is, and we put them into this position inside of Syria? So this isn't covered. Obama's response and Romney's response is covered. That's that goes to what Warren was saying in the first hour, that there's no news, at least no news that's being reported. There's all kinds of news that's happening behind the scenes, which leads me to where I think we're at. I see a concerted effort to enter the planet into crisis on every front. On the financial side, you know, we're told that 13K on Dow equals we can calm down and everything's going to get back to normal. But behind the scenes, behind that non-news, is you have the ECB coming out saying, well, we have a new plan that's going to rescue everything. We're going to issue debt, and the only thing you need to do is give up 100% of your sovereignty, give up your ability to determine your own future, and give oversight to the IMF. That's barely touched on. I mean, it managed to stoke a rally on Wall Street. Here you have the news behind the news is panic in the big firms over the financial cliff that we're rapidly approaching. But again, peripheral news. It's put out for the consumption of so-called investors so that they can hold out some hope. You have Ben Bernanke come out of Jackson Hole talking about he'll do everything possible. Even though people who spend their life doing this, people that, worked with Warren Pollock, or Warren Pollock himself, would probably say that there's no way that any more quantitative easing is going to get a decent return on that investment. It is game over when it comes to that. So we're down to, a financial crisis that leads to the looting that you're talking about, and then a solution on the backside of it, which is give more power and control to the same banks that are proposing the solutions on the front end. So that's the financial side of it. On the other crisis end of it, which is the military expansion, you have what's going on in Libya right now. We set ourselves up to fail. What's going on in Syria, where we're pounding the war drums every day with Hillary Clinton and John McCain and Joe Lieberman to get out there and talk about how we have to provide this no-fly zone. And in case that isn't scaring the people in the country enough, leading us into more war, we have Netanyahu coming out talking about, the United States doesn't have the moral authority to put a red light in front of Israel because we won't draw a red line in the sand against Iran. So, I see the stage has been set over the last several years. The stage has been set to go ahead and let the global economy fall apart and have an answer by these globalists, Warren, that want to have the answer of more power control to these banks. And you have the financial crisis set up that way. And in case the people riot and take to the streets because their standard of living is falling through the floor, And when the ultimate crisis is released, which is basically shutting off a switch, so 165 million Americans that draw some kind of check from the government are all of a sudden without any kind of support and any kind of hope. They're in the streets, but they're ready for that too because they have this uncontrollable security apparatus in force that will quell down any uprising. So I think we've been set up like a golf ball on a golf tee, and I don't know what the crisis event when it's coming, but I don't know what the trigger is going to be. It could be many different things or everything at once, but when it comes, it's going to be literally earth-shattering, and that's my take of where we're at. So, I guess let's start off to see where you guys agree or disagree. Warren, I'll kick it to you first.
Well, I think what you're describing are events that are happening, and you're also, I think, talking about things from a Western standpoint, from a standpoint of how things might look now from the U.S., from Russia, and from Europe. And there has been a trend towards globalization that's been in place for a very long time. And when we look at the United States, how many people are wagging the flag of celebrity versus wagging the flag of nationalism? And the flag of nationalism is being waged in China, it's being waged in Turkey, it's being waged in Russia, and within the United States, we have sort of this domestic policy that links economic activity to military, to oil, to the reserve currency. And those four things are all things which are running against the trend of globalization. I know that globalization has occurred. You could see it around your house in all the goods that you own. You could see it in the diminishing salaries that you have. You could see globalization in the restrictive freedom. But as is employment now a fragile thing, so is this global system. It is extremely fragile, and it's been built to perfection. For example, if I was China waving the nationalistic flag, and they're more nationalistic internally than they are externally, if they could assure their own stability, what do they do with their labor pool? Once they figure that out, internal consumption, military build-out, infrastructure, they could use zero interest rate policy to their advantage. They could start to sell our 30-year dated treasury bonds, all the bad real estate loans, and they could buy U.S. short-term bonds, and they could sever the economic relationship with us in an instant. They could take their navy and they could harass Japan in disputed islands. We could have Turkey pushing into Syria or Iran. We could have Russia using its intelligence state. So globalization, it looks like it on the surface, but in reality, it's not going to go in that direction.
All right, hang tight, Warren. I just heard the music myself. We'll be back with the rest of Warren Pollock's analysis of where we're at, and then we're going to kick it to Reginald. We'll be back in 3.5 minutes. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. We're joined by Warren Pollock and Reginald, also known as DEMCAD from YouTube. And I want to apologize to Bob Tuskin. This is it. Karen's handling the scheduling for the program and doing a absolutely fantastic job. And she's she is celebrating her birthday. Is taking a few days off. And the minute she leaves, I completely screw up her schedule. So, Bob Tuskin, I apologize. I know you were on hold and trying to contact the program, and we're going to reschedule. I've been chatting with Bob during the break. We'll reschedule to get Bob Tuskin on again very, very soon. So, and I apologize to Karen for goofing up her schedule. Warren, you laid out a very very foreseeable potential future where you have these pockets of nationalism. Inevitably, that tends to lead to one thing, right? I mean, that tends to lead to conflict between these nationalistic ideals. And
well, you also have non-negotiable zealots out there too, as is expressed today. It's let's storm the embassy because of a YouTube video that we saw which said that Muhammad, wasn't a great guy. So, you're living in a world that's been built to perfection. And yes, there was a Davos and the Bilderbergs and all Agenda 21, the UN and all these people. Yeah, they do get together behind closed doors. And Charlie Rose is one of them. If you ever want to listen to his cracked out view of the world as he interviews all the insiders. And they were all envisioning globalization with the U.S. playing a prominent part, uplifting everyone and building stability. And they would all meet together and slap each other on the back in their $3,000 Canali suits and say what smart people we are, and the Nissim Taleb and all of these other guys that come up with one idea like Black Swan and then write a 400-page book about it. And they're all congratulating themselves about how smart they are. And by the way, they can tell their broker, to buy Consolidated Fuzz because they have an inside deal where things are heading. Yes, those are all the people that wanted to put globalism together. And you've seen the result of it right now. You've seen, tremendous issuance of debt. You've seen a country which can't talk about $1.2 trillion spent military projection. You have a country which doesn't understand where its energy comes from. You have a healthcare system. It was out today that there was $750 billion a year in misallocated money and fraud built into your healthcare system. That's probably closer to $1 trillion a year or more. And all of these things are instabilities within the context of perfection. And other countries have long histories, and they have histories of being empires of various kinds and sizes, and they're not listening to what Charlie Rose and his bunch of buddies had to say, and they don't believe them anyway. And that is all of this vulnerability to this, caves of steel existence, which is envisioned through the John Birch Society and through the alternate media. Caves of Steel being a book by Isaac Asimov, where people lived in caves underground in little cubicles with shared bathrooms and, a food which was artificially produced. And then when they go outside to the world, they're in shock and can't move around because they've never experienced that in their lives. The world used just for its agriculture. But a lot of this Caves of Steel existence.
Are you thinking this is just human nature then? I mean, no design, no, not being led in this direction? Or is it human nature and greed that has brought us to this point?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I know the people in Wall Street intimately because 250 brokerage companies were my client. And yeah. I know these people and I know how they're motivated. On the political side, I know a lot of mid to high level bureaucrats. I don't know really any politicians per se. I mean, I've met 2 governors and a senator and a Kennedy, but that's about it. But in terms, I could give you my perceptions. The guys on Wall Street that I've worked with, their one concern is money and getting laid and getting a limousine to take them to the strip club so that they can go home to their wives and then not talk about it. And the people in the upper or mid-level of government want to collect their $160,000 salaries. They want to send their kids to daycares they can't get them into because lobbyists have them locked down at $26,000 a year. And they want to do whatever their constituents say they should do. And then the controller of the currency, that's the major banks. So we have people, and I know several people in the control of the currency. I went to high school with one of them, and I know people in the, head lawyers for lobby groups like the NRA and those kinds of people. But these people at the level that's above that are mostly interested in power, and they are living in a bubble of self-importance, pretty much. And they're not particularly empathetic. They're not particularly bright. And a lot of times now they're just branded, as is the case of Obama or Romney. And there are groups of people that have deep pockets and a lot of money that do meet, and they have the same sort of warped view that finance is important, where the physical world is more important. They have interested in money. Maybe I know some people that most of the people I know are in that group are in the 60 million range. I know one person that's in the $1 billion range. And they're mostly interested in taking private jets everywhere and milking money from their fund. That's it.
Is it possible that these people, although greedy, are just being manipulated by a higher authority?
Wait a minute. Don't answer that, Warren. And I promise I want to get Reginald's take on where we stand, where we're heading, and we're going to do that right after this 3-minute break. Hang tight. McGrath, Reginald, also known as DEMCAD from YouTube, Warren Pollock. The question was posed a half hour ago by Warren to me, what I think where we're at. I gave my synopsis. Warren gave his, and now I want to kick it over to Reginald. And again, I think, and I'm going to be real brief here because Reggie, I want to give you plenty of time. I enjoy talking to Warren, Reginald, and people from all over different parts of this country because I truly see different perspectives in a breakdown. And I believe New York. I've spent some time on the East Coast, Nova Scotia, and even in New York, and see the things seem there's this normalcy there. The thing seems. I'll try to get this out.
Normalcy.
Yeah, normalcy. I got normalcy out, but I can't get seams out.
Well, I'm thinking of Dirk Diggler, but what can I tell you?
Things seem normal where this, where it's supposed to seem normal in the financial epicenters, but in the rest of the country, especially in the heartland, it's rapidly deteriorating. And so, for a perspective of where we're at and where we're going, Reginald, give us your take. Dirk Diggler.
Well, I never really saw globalization as something that was really meant to be stable. I mean, because whenever you're taking a whole lot of wealth from one group of people and giving it to another group of people, I think you're going to have inherent instability right there because you're going to have conflict because you have one group losing a lot and another group gaining more. And with globalization, I think what they were trying to do was take away the power from the nation states and create a situation where they can manipulate entire peoples on an international level. I think they're trying to take away power from the people by taking away power from the nation states. And they had a vision of what they wanted the world to be, but I think that with their fraud, with their systems as just based on credit and debt, it's imploding.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just isn't going to work. I know there's people talk about, the New World Order is going to take over this and that. I think I see this as just a failed power grab. People are so greedy, so obsessed with taking over that they're actually willing to destroy themselves and everything else to get something that they want. It's almost like a disease or something, some type of mental illness.
Right. And I think, Reg, I mean, I don't know if you experienced this, but I've experienced it. You get to manage an organization that's so large and has so many moving parts. It's not really anything that you can control. You just sort of say, okay, I'll set the leadership tone or I'll push it in this direction. And these people may have been pushing us towards globalism. The Wizard of Oz, the guy behind the curtain, may have been pushing us to globalism. But right now it's all based on fraud and it's based on models that have been in place since 1940, and it was enforced after World War II and securitized by the atomic bomb and the Cold War. And, when this power structure breaks, you wind up in a Soviet collapse, only this time it will be some sort of global collapse. And there are winners and there are losers. At the end of it, if we were to drop our empire, we would probably be better off than where we are today. But today there's a lot of things that's softening the blow. You can go into Walmart and get a lot of goods from China. So you earn $7 an hour. You buy a toaster that costs $15, right? You work 2 hours for a toaster, but you can't afford to go over the Throgs Neck Bridge because that costs you $14. So we're seeing all sorts of dislocations, all sorts of problems. And, maybe I have not pressed flesh with people that are high enough. I'm sure that George Soros and that all of these other people have visions for where things want to go. I know that Barack Obama doesn't have any vision whatsoever. My experience there was just was just that they were just trying to bide for time. So I would have in just an impression, just in the time frame of an impression, which I really can't talk about, but if we have these leaders right now that are as embedded into the context as you and I are, that context we described, where you walk outside and all these corporations are around you. They don't have, they have an understanding of what they've been taught in Harvard or Yale, what the Keynesian economics is, and maybe they figured out what Austrian economics is, but they haven't even envisioned the possibility that these theories are wrong. They just figured they'll take their silver spoon and wind up managing a large corporation, or in the case of Bush, be best friends with Prince Bandar. And
sure, so they get the people that have the right pedigree, they get the right education, and then their front men, their spokesmen for the establishment. Warren, I think you coined the term legal-based and financial-based capitalism. I don't believe we have representative government at all. I think we have bought and paid for government by these institutions that are behind the people like Obama and Romney. But what about a hybrid theory between regionals, which is it's collapsing down, and there was maybe an ideal for globalism, but it's all falling apart, and maybe to summarize your synopsis, which would be greed and human nature has led to this event, and there will be people who capitalize off it. Well, when I look at the world, I see,
but also history. I mean, this is where, we talked about, I laid out in a presentation which no one wanted to see, what is the best information. So the best information that you could see is either in the far past or by the science fiction. And, the eyebrows are raised. What do you mean science fiction is where you should look? Because you could look at people like Neil Stephenson, who has critiqued his ability to look into the future through his writings. He's extremely difficult to read. He makes up his own languages. He's MIT trained or whatever. He's a guy that was Frederick Poller or Isaac Asimov, the guy that was talking about robots and how it would affect dehumanized society. These are the people that know enough about the present technologically to figure out where we're going to be in the near future. People like Newt Gingrich that have writing fiction, Ari Turtlove, they're looking in the future. The people in the past have best information in the books that compare and contrast. So if you can take 4 books from World War II and compare and contrast them, which I've done, I've looked at the books from Yamamoto, from Speer, and from all hosts of other people, Kissinger. I must have read about a dozen books about World War II, and then you get sort of a feel of how everyone sees things differently, and you get the best information in the past, and with the victor usually writing the history, and you get the best information by people that are able to see into the future because of their credentials, because they've dedicated a lot of thought to it, or just sheer brilliance sometimes. And what we're in now is in the middle. And that's where the most poor information is. So if you look to the past a little bit and you start to ask the questions, what's the history of Russia? And I've taken 2 or 3 courses in Soviet history, and I thought it was totally out the window. I thought it was my version of going to college to learn something totally useless. But it proved not to be useless because that security state is still in place today, only it's called Russia. And then you understand a little bit, based on the past, what those people are thinking and then how they think. And the same thing with China. You look at the history of China as it's oscillated between empire and different factions, and you may get the details wrong along the way, but you find out that the process of thinking, the cultural thinking, is very different than it is here. So that's how you can sort of look into the future a little bit and figure out where we're going to go. But if you just do it from our perspective, you're not going to wind up anywhere but in this big noise box.
But you say R. I mean, we'll take this last break of the program, then we'll get back, because I want to kind of develop what is R. What is R? Because I think the globe has been turned into an R. Even with China and Russia. We're going to be back in 3 minutes. Back to WideAwakeNews Radio. Charlie McGrath, Warren Pollock, and DEMCAD, and we're having a conversation during the break. And Warren brought up a good point during the break, which is, a lot of things that Warren and I have talked about on the program over the last year and a half are, being we're talking about them, things going on with inside of Turkey, Syria, Iran. These things, Warren, we're the first that I know of to come on and talk about Turkey. And here they are back in the news again, talking about energy resources as being turning a table to where the United States is going to be a producer. This seems to be coming to pass. This is where I get confused, and this is where I get bogged down in I guess the differences between our opinion, and it bothers me because I think I line up in quite a different areas with the way that you and I think, but you brought up Charlie Rose and how he is tying or he's developed relationships, has close ties with a lot of these people, these uber elites that meet behind closed doors, and they don't necessarily sit down and write, we're going to collapse the euro, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, but they set the tone just like you would in a board meeting. You're going to set the tone, the agenda for your company going forward. And I really believe that it's impossible to see what we have now as not being that kind of influence from outside of government. I mean, it really befuddles me that we even can pretend that there's representative government left anymore, because every government in the world is doing everything that is complete opposite of helping the people that they're there to represent. So they must be following the orders, or at least the tenor of someone else. And we talk, over this last couple hours, we've talked about, the progression of things are going to go continually get worse, and that we're going to maybe go to war here, we're going to have food shortages there. I think that's all true, but I don't think it's accident. I don't think it's by accident. I think that if anything has been shown to us over the last several years, especially talking about the things that were self-evident that are going to come to pass with different crises around the world, it is that through great crisis, we are being subjected to great change. And through great crisis, we lose our freedom, and we are consolidating more global power into into fewer and fewer numbers. So, I agree with both of you. Go ahead.
It's too systematic. It's too systematic to say that, there isn't some type of organization here. There's some type of agenda going on. It's too systematic. They do the same tactics over and over again. They create a problem, and there's a reaction by the people, and then they exploit the situation and project themselves as heroes. They provide their own solution, which puts them in a position to get something that they normally wouldn't be able to get. It's just too systematic, and you're seeing it all over the world in different countries. You're seeing the same tactics from the IMF and from the same organizations, the same type of bailouts, the same type of banks doing the same type of things over and over again in a systematic way. So I don't think it's just pure greed. There's always been greed. There's always been people who've been looking out to cover their own butts. But I think this greed and this phenomena has been exploited by people who are pushing a certain agenda. Whether it's going to be successful, I don't know.
Well, you said it's the same thing over and over again, and that's sort of the clue. It is the same thing over and over again. It's a solutionless approach, and part of it is Steve Jobs' idea. I think it was someone that worked for him who coined the word reality distortion field. So if you get 100 guys in a room that are all multi-millionaires and billionaires, they sort of convince themselves with tremendous egos that they could actually affect the course of the world. And we had, Rockefeller with the Trilateral Organization, being a start of that. The Bilderbergers are part of that approach.
Right.
But it does neglect history. And I don't know. Let me just rattle off three names: Ataturk, Beria, and Lee Kuan Yew. All right. So who here knows who they are?
I have no clue.
So the listeners, who are those three people? All right. So we have Beria, who was in the intelligence state of the Soviet Union. You have Lee Kuan Yew, who was in Singapore from third world to first. And who was the other individual? Ataturk, who was the George Washington of Turkey. who basically defeated the British in the Dardenians. How do I pronounce that? I'm going to have word salad again. Dardanelles. Dardanelles, Turkey. I got to look this up. Hold on a second.
The Dirk Digglers.
Dirk Digglers. It's Dardanelles. And I remember from history that he launched the British off of the beach, and that was a turn for Turkish nationalism. And then when you go back, I would ask everybody, what's the Qin dynasty? All right? Or Qing dynasty. I think that's the better way to pronounce it. Qing dynasty. So, that was one of the empires. Well, I think the Qing dynasty was part of the Chinese history. It was one of the unifications of history from 1644 on. So when you're talking about all these things about this globalization, it's all within the historic context of your individual bias. And I have contacts now all over the world through these videos, including students from Taiwan and a fellow in South Korea. It's 15 miles from North Korea. And we had an hour discussion, which was an interview that got hardly any viewership, where we talked about all the fact that everything that we're talking about Korea is not from the Korean perspective. So when you're listening to the same thing over and over again, and this is true of us, listening to John Birch's and Von Mises and the Koch brothers or Koch brothers agenda points, it's the same thing that's happening to Charlie Rose and his cohorts of merry men who think that they're masters of the world, and they maybe know a little more history than we do because they've been educated in Harvard instead of picking up a book, but they're not at all empathetic to anyone except their own agenda and themselves. And their viewpoint is.
What is? I mean, how do you not look around the world right now and see that what we're talking about, and not necessarily this conspiratorial New World Order. Well, you know what? Actually, yes, this conspiratorial New World Order. We are being. Is it coincidence that we're being led globally into this? This phase.
The globally is the big misnomer. There is
no, it isn't. Look around the world. I mean, we're in the South China Sea. We're confronting China on that front. We're competing with Russia almost daily on a beating of the drums of war inside of Syria and Iran. We have military presence.
But isn't that contention recently new? In other words, that's the change, okay? That contention that you're talking about in the South China Sea and with Turkey and Syria and with Russia revitalizing itself after collapse, those are all the challenges to the momentum of globalization. Right. And if I was a betting man, I would bet that those challenges win. And the reason I would bet that they would win is because the U.S. system, as we know it, is based on fraud and lies. It just is.
Right, but it's also
economically.
We can't just say a U.S. system, right? We can't. We
are tied. Well, the U.S. system
Spain,
is more than
Italy.
Yeah, well, the U.S. system is more than just the U.S. The U.S. system is the U.S.
We've been tied at the hip with
it's Western
500
Europe.
million people of Europe. I mean, the West. We have to say the West in general, and I agree with you.
Japan. You look at we have Singapore, which is bisexual. They'll go either which way the tide turns, and you have in your mindset the momentum of globalization that was in place since 1940.
Yeah.
5 with the victory of World War II, and it wasn't cemented because Truman didn't understand what the atomic bomb was about. And guys like Patton, MacArthur, and all these other people had the idea that we could have sort of mastered the world. And Truman said, the American people have had enough, and I need to get reelected. And, there's enough war, and no one else is going to get the atomic bomb because it's 1940s technology, and no one will want to spend so much money to do this. And by the way, why don't we give it away free to General Electric? Now that we have the only industrial capacity in the world, and before that it was the British Empire.
Right. And I don't want to cut you off, but we have about a minute left, and I think at the end of it, you and I come to the same conclusion. You have the West, call it Europe, call it United States, Japan, people who've aligned themselves with this empire butting up against maybe a collaboration between Russia and China, or
I don't think so. I don't think so. But look at the fuller map, the Dymaxion map, and that gives you an idea of who's connected to what places and how.
Right.
And just by looking at the map, you get a better understanding of how Island America fits into that whole outlook. Okay, so right now, how many people have seen the Dymaxion map? And then we talk about some basic players in modern history, and you know, this is not in the American context,
right?
You don't need a lot of depth in history, but you do need what used to be taught, which is geography, and then you do need a cursory idea of what I would say is a concept in history, which is how and why and what. And even the details. That used to be done this date, this date, this date. You just need the concepts to understand what's going on.
Warren Edward Pollock, Reginald, also known as DEMCAD from YouTube, thank you very much for hanging out with me for both hours tonight, guys. I greatly appreciate it. Always informative, Warren. Thank you. Reginald, and we'll get you back on again here real soon, both you guys, if you can make it. I want to continue this conversation. I want to continue the debate. I wish we almost had a third hour to keep this going. Please enjoy Jeff Rense. He's coming up next, and we will see you guys tomorrow night at the same time. Thank you very much for hanging out with me.